Good afternoon, everybody. Ooh, these well executive sessions just keep getting better and better. If you didn't have a chance to catch the last webcast that we did with the one and only Rick Fedrizzi, I promise it is worth a listen. And so is today's conversation, because I would venture to say that today's guest has played one of the most central and formative roles in the green and healthy buildings movement, going all the way back to the early days. Don't be fooled by his boyish looks. But in all seriousness, I am so fortunate that over the course of my career, I get to partner with people as spectacular as Brendan Owens, the sustainability icon that he is. And I'm even more fortunate to say that I call him one of my very dearest friends, a friend, as it turns out, of nearly 20 years, dating back to our time at the US Green Building Council. So today, I am so thrilled to be introducing you all to this incredibly accomplished human being, one of the best people that I know, and the tremendous role that he has played in architecting market transformation. If you already know Brendan well, and I know some of you do, I hope today you'll get to see a different side of him. You'll get an inside perspective on all of the ways in which he's been working to ensure that his teams, his family, and he himself are working and living well. In addition to getting a glimpse into Brendan's new day-to-day as Chief Sustainability Officer and Principal at the leading global design firm HKS, we'll talk about the legacy of his leadership at the DoD and what the sum total of his experiences have taught him about managing teams, managing stress, and managing change. So please just give me a few extra moments to brag on my good friend Brendan, because I know that he is not going to do it for himself. He has had a seismic impact on the green building movement. In the formative years of LEED, he was the gatekeeper. There was not a significant change or update to the rating system that Brendan didn't have a hand in. And I know that personally because I used to petition him for some of those changes. As the former chief engineer of USGBC, he played an outside role in defining what it means to be a green building, and by way of LEED, defining what leadership looked like within the movement. And since he's gone on since then, he's gone on to be the Senate confirmed Assistant Secretary of Defense, Energy, Installations, and Environment, and the Chief Sustainability Officer for the Department of Defense for the United States of America. No big deal. We had to call him Honorable Owens. You can still call him Honorable Owens. He oversaw in that role more than 500,000 buildings, over 26 million acres of land, and housing for over 2 million service members. Today, as mentioned, Brendan's latest adventure is as a member of the leadership team at HKS, one of the largest and most renowned architecture and design firms in the United States, and that is only scratching the surface. So before we officially dive in, and I let Brendan get a word in edgewise, I'd like to take a quick moment to thank our amazing sponsor of the Well Executive Platform, Daikin, leading innovation in heating, air conditioning, and ventilation technology for over 100 years, whose generous support makes this interview and the Well Executive Platform possible. Now, without further ado, let's get started. All right, B, welcome. Been looking forward to this for some time.
That was much more kind than I deserve, I think. So I appreciate it very much. Thanks, friend.
I felt it was understated.
Yeah.
We typically kick off Well Executive with a series of rapid fire questions to get everybody warmed up. But today we thought that it'd be nice to do a little throwback to our USGBC days. Some of you may recall a very obscure edutainment mini-series that we posted on the education platform called Ask Brendan. Ask Brendan basically consisted of me and Brendan sitting on my living room couch, and Brendan having to answer the most obscure, nerdy questions about green building as I attempted to stump the expert, all while sipping on green building themed cocktails that we taught people to make throughout the episode. Super fun. We've continued.
Somehow, I think the importance of it in our initial conception of it was you had it backwards. I think It was green building themed cocktails, and then what can we build around that? So
that is for sure. And today we decided it's a little bit early for the cocktails, but we're going to keep the Ask Brendan tradition going. In fact, it's a tradition we've continued with our chief engineer, Nathan Stadola, who regularly hosts Ask Nathan sessions for our technical support team. And so, of course, we had to tap Nathan and other members of our Sarah development team to cook up some real zingers for the Honorable Owens. Feel free if you've got nerdy.
Which is terrifying, because there was a time when I felt like I was in the mix to be an expert on some of these things. And the further I've progressed in my career, the less day-to-day stuff I've been doing. So fingers crossed.
I promised you, I promise you that you are free to phone a friend, and you've got several friends on the line, including the one and only Nathan Stadola and several
Great,
members of the
great.
SD team. So here we go. And audience members, do feel free to put your questions into the chat. Are you ready, B?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. All right. Let's start with one from Nathan. You'll be psyched to talk about this one because we all know that HKS is working on the Commanders Stadium in Washington, D.C., something we'll come back to later. So Nathan asks, regarding sports centers, which is greater, the amount of energy used to operate a large stadium on game day or the amount of energy used by the spectators to go to and from the station?
That's a great question, and it depends on where you put the stadium, I think. So the surge nature of a lot of those facilities is one it's a hugely complicating factor, right? So I will say, I'll make a bold prediction here, is that because Commanders is coming back into the district adjacent to a metro line that is called Stadium Armory, and it has been just the Armory for the past several years because RFK Stadium wasn't being used because it wasn't in any condition to being used. I'm going to make a prediction that this stadium, the Commander Stadium that HKS is partnering with the Commanders team and the city on and the district on, is going to use less transportation energy than the old one, which was out in Maryland and required a huge acres and acres of parking. So there's a huge opportunity for this stadium to reset that paradigm in the district. So transit-oriented stadium development is something that is I'm really proud to see the city, to see the district, to see our role in that, and the Commanders for bringing the stadium back in.
Brilliant.
Like
it all comes down to sustainable sites.
Nathan. It depends on where you put it, right? Yeah.
It's complicated, as we say. Yeah. All right, here's one that I really love. This one is from Anya, who's also a member of our standard development team, longtime member. And she asked, we've mapped almost every part of the building's impact on our health, but what is the one microbiome of the built environment that we are still essentially ignoring? What is the most significant hidden environmental liability that the public isn't talking about yet?
Is it like an opinion question, or am I supposed to have a scientific answer to this one? What's the biggest opportunity that we haven't tapped into yet?
Or like, what's the thing that matters so much that we just are not really thinking about, aware of, talking about?
We've been talking a lot lately about, what does Heatherwick call it? There's this whole conversation around beauty and joy and the neuro impact of walking into the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, right? Yeah. There is a body of knowledge that exists that says that when you walk into a space like that, you have a physiological response, you have a neurological response. And I think that in terms of the things that I'm excited about working at a design firm, it is learning all of those things and capitalizing on the opportunity. To bring it back to Commanders, like when you look at that stadium and you understand that it anchors the eastern edge of the L'Enfant plan for DC, right? So it's Lincoln, Washington Monument, Capitol Building, Supreme Court, Library of Congress, and then this what L'Enfant probably had in his head as the closest archetype to this would be the Colosseum in Rome or something like that. Seeing that sort of laid out and then understanding what we're doing with this stadium brings me a level of like joy, and because it fits the city well. It comes together with the rest of the plan well. All of that makes cognitive sense to me, and it changes the way that I experience the building. And I think that there's any number of ways that we could lean into the opportunity that beauty and intentional moments of joy can be can be planned and delivered as part of a building project. So there's a lot of work that HKS is doing in that space right now, which I will say I am not PhD enough to necessarily understand all the neurological implications of what's happening. But intuitively, when somebody says this is what happens to your body, I can feel that being true in my
Yeah.
experience. So I
It's
would
so
probably do that.
interesting because we've long had this notion of beauty and design as a part of the well criteria. And people tend to have very strong reactions to that. Linda Sorrento in the chat, Bill Browning, and Tara Ping Bright Green have been advocating for and researching for a long time, like these impacts that to date have often we've seen them as soft or hard to measure, like awe and wonder and delight. And then you talk to architects and designers and who of course this resonates, like you're saying, to the core of their being. Meanwhile, there are others, maybe like sometimes facilities managers, who are like, this stuff is soft, it discredits the system. We've even heard things
Yeah.
that strong. But I agree with you. I think if you're someone who's tuned into that particular sense, or way of sense making in the world, it just resonates with you immediately. I've always felt like I'm practically allergic, like even as a small child, to certain physical environments just because of
Yeah.
the design. But I think it's harder for others to embrace that. So the research that's being done by many of our partners, I think, is to actually
Yeah.
quantify that and prove that is, I think, really important.
Yeah.
Lest we leave it off the table.
Yeah. Well, and I don't think beauty has to be one thing, right? It can be, beauty comes in different shapes and forms. And I think that's the power of being very intentional about what you're trying to design as a space. It can manifest in a myriad of different ways. Like I think a lot of the brutalist architecture in DC and Boston City Hall is a great example. I think those buildings are fascinating, right? I can understand how they are off-putting, right, to some people, but that doesn't mean that they can't resonate with and create those. Todd, your neuromorphic integration moment can manifest from those things, and it's really exciting, and I'm excited to be a part of it,
Mm-hmm.
even just
Yeah.
as the small role that I get to play here on
But there's
that.
also something to be said, and I think this is so important with the Commanders Stadium as an example of like being in tune with your community and what their aesthetics are, what their preferences are for beauty. Like I'll never forget going to a very contemporary LEED certified school back in my USGBC days in rural Pennsylvania, and I was asking the teachers and the administrators, like, how do you feel about this like incredible school? It's like the only modern structure in the entire community. They said, well, we really like it, but it's ugly as hell.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just there is an element of tuning into the community that you're in service to that also is vitally important. Last
Of the
question
place is important. Of the place is important.
of the place. That's right. Context. Okay, last nerdy green building question, and then we're gonna get to the heart of the matter. This one is from Miranda Brazil, one of our newest team members at IWBI, at least officially. Welcome, Miranda. She asks, healthy design features like advanced HEPA filtration or non-toxic finishes are often marketed as premium amenities in the residential market. What policy or design levers should be engaged to ensure that health-focused design becomes a baseline for affordable housing rather than a luxury add-on?
Well, I will say one of the things, there's a couple things that I would say. One of the things that I was doing in the waning days of the time that I got to spend in the Pentagon was trying to link, because DoD self-insures, right? They have their own healthcare system for service members and their families. So decisions that are made in the built environment that compromise the health of the people who are in uniform and their families are paid by a different bucket of money somewhere else. One of the things that I was trying to do in partnership with one of my colleagues there was to create an avenue for prevention to be something that was paid for by the 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 medical portion of the Pentagon budget. We didn't make a lot of progress. Um, because while the idea is, I mean, probably to people that are on this uh on this call, pretty self-evident in and of itself. Um, there the way to describe budget allocation in the Pentagon that most accurately, I think, reflects it is a knife fight. So we couldn't sort of say, give us some of yours so we can put it here to reduce yours somewhere down the line. We didn't have that causal link established yet. But I would say that prevention is the thing that I would put into the equation that would obviate the need for some of the medicalized and interventions that are necessary after the fact. And I think there's no more important place to do it than in the communities that are inhabiting affordable housing, because they're generally speaking the ones who are at the limit of being able to deal with the medical stress and the things that come
Financial stress.
with that, and the financial stress associated with the medical stress that sort of compound on each other. So, I think there's ample evidence to suggest that if we were to invest in those spaces, it would have long-term benefit. We just have balkanized the budgets in a way, because it's not just the Pentagon problem, it's a city of Boston problem, it's a District of Columbia problem. If we were to integrate those budget threads a little bit more intentionally, we'd probably be able to say $1 spent here is worth $15 spent here. In a
I
very
think that problem that you're describing, minus the knife fight, is like practically universal for large, complex organizations. And we hear it all the time. And yet, to really solve this and fund the solution, we're going to have to think beyond our silos, organizationally speaking. Um, let's go back to the good old days.
All right. Well, that was all right. I feel like the stress part of this
I
conversation is
know
awesome.
you didn't fail, that I can say. But we'll have to get the score from Nathan later
Solid
on.
C plus.
Okay, now let's go back to the good old days. We basically, I mean, I don't know how you think of this, but I think of myself as like a kid when I started at USGBC almost 20 years ago. I just thought, like, I can't believe that I'm getting the opportunities that I'm getting professionally, but we were growing so quickly and there was so much white space for leadership. Here we are, just like toiling away, trying to change the world one square foot at a time, one registered project at a day. I just remember them as being intense, but so full of purpose. Tell the folks on the line, what was like the state of LEAD as a product when you started? And what was the magnetic pull that drew you to the work?
The state of LEAD when I started, it was a PDF document on an embarrassingly designed website. If you can go back in the Wayback Machine and look at USGBC's website from like 2003 or 2002,
It left much to be desired.
it looked like it was like one of those AOL like early day. A lot of room for improvement. They have come a long way with their branding, and that is a good thing. So it was a PDF document. You could download it. I remember having a conversation with another standards developer. When I told them that you could download LEAD for free, they were like, how can that be? Because everybody else was selling stuff. And one of the things that USGBC did smartly, in my opinion, was give it away to get the ball rolling, and get people excited about it. We were doing certification reviews in paper, right? So people would send binders of documentation to where were we? 1015 18th Street. Is that the? Yeah, that was the first address. And we were inundated with these. We would get file boxes full of these full of documentation. And GBCI was Emily Turk. It was Emily Turk and Mark Frankel were GBCI. Now it's like, I don't know, 300 people that do that plus another 200 consultants.
Totally.
So that was the state of the place. We had 11 employees when I started, so uh, that was good. But the thing,
Including the head of HR who worked out of a storage closet.
right?
Yeah.
Yes. Um, and
And what drew you? Like, why did you take the job?
well, so I guess looking back on it, I had lived a pretty typical unexamined life for a relatively well-to-do kid who went to engineering college, white man type of thing. And I went and did the interview with Nigel Howard and Peter Templeton. And the question that Nigel sort of started the interview with was, what makes you want the most important job in the world? And I was like, what? What is this guy talking about? Right? This guy's nuts. Um, but then he sort of connected it all together, climate change. We weren't really talking about human health as much. We were talking about air pollution. We were talking about materials extraction, environmental collapse, and those types of things. And all of a sudden it dawned on me, it was like, I didn't like have to process any of this in my head when I was doing the engineering work that I was doing previous. It's all about energy conservation because it was all about money. But then um, an operating expense. But then you see, it sort of dawned on me that there's this other thing that we could using the built environment to create. And all these people had already been doing all this work. So it was like exciting to be a part of that. So that was what hooked me. Um, the second half of the interview was them basically saying they thought they had enough money to pay my salary for the rest of the year. But at that point, they had already grabbed me so firmly and like gotten me into the mix that it was like, all right, of course I'm coming here. I want to be a part of what this is. And I didn't know if it was going to last. I had in my back of my head, I didn't think it would because like who does nonprofit work type of thing. But 19, almost 20 years later, it was a good run.
Rick often talks about the healthy building movement um, as the second wave of sustainability. Like to your point, it wasn't necessarily a central part of the thesis in the early days of LEED, but along the way, we were discovering all of these profound ways in which buildings that were better for the planet were better for people. Um, and so Rick talks about, healthy buildings not as like disparate from the green building movement, but like a second wave of leadership. In the early days, there were a number of skeptics, and you were one of them who voiced concerns about, this idea that in applying a dedicated focus on human health, we might somehow like undo all that good work or backtrack on the good work that we had dedicated our careers to in those earliest efforts to advance energy efficiency and what we eventually would refer to as decarbonization. Flash forward to your time at the DoD, where you became an incredibly impassioned advocate for healthy buildings, in particular healthy housing, as being core to the mission and core to the readiness of our troops. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what shifted your perspective.
Yeah, I guess my initial reluctance was more rooted in a sense that, or an understanding that when you optimize for one portion of a system without considering the rest of the ramifications, you can really have some unintended consequences, right? And I think the classic example is using, kilowatts and kilowatts worth of electricity to clean air when that electricity is being generated by coal, right? So you clean the air in your building at the expense of the outside air, right? And that sort of need to be integrative in the way that we think about these things, I think is still rooted in everything that we're doing. But that was the initial reluctance that I had, that if we give people permission, is probably the wrong way to say, if we give people a focus, they're going to optimize around this one thing and they're not going to care, or they're not going to be seeing the ramifications of their decisions elsewhere. And I think the evolution for me was about understanding that there's an asymptote to how much different groups of people will care about different issues, right? There are lots and lots of people, maybe not lots and lots, but there are lots of people in the Department of Defense right now who passionately care about climate change and mitigation. Um, they are hang in there, y'all. Uh, but there are many, many more who don't, right? So one of the things that we did was to basically try to find different doors for people to walk through
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
they could see themselves in and feel connected to an outcome that was important to them. Um, Resilience was one of those. Readiness is one of those, and readiness is connected to health, right? So the evolution that we I was that was part of my sort of arc here was driven by a design, like an understanding that we can only take certain people as far as they're willing to go, and then they're like, all right, I'm not interested in that anymore. But if we gave them something that they were interested in and walked them through the door, they would see that the heat pump that the climate change people were asking them to install had a benefit from regional air quality because it reduced the amount of natural gas that was being burned on an installation. And that was a good thing, right? So those those different ways of getting to the same, what is essentially, in a lot of ways, the same solution set was the thing that brought me around. And then the other, maybe larger emotional factor was just seeing the conditions in a lot of the barracks that were and unaccompanied housing that we're asking our service members to live in. Well, not asking them. They volunteer and then we say, you're going to live there. So they volunteered to do a job and then we're telling them where to live. And where we're telling them to live is in many, many instances uh, inadequate, only scratches the surface in terms of the words that should be used.
I want to stay on that note for a minute because earlier in the session, you mentioned that some of the work had not continued, some of the progress had not continued. But in fact, there are a number of things that you set into motion in your role at the DoD that have not only continued on, soldiered on, if you will, in the months since, but perhaps even picked up some steam. So, where are the places, like the bright spots that we can look to where some of the leadership that you brought into that role has kicked off elements of progress and evolution that are really worth celebrating? Because we all
Yeah,
need a little bit of
yeah, I
that
don't
right
know. I don't know
now.
how helpful. I don't know how productive it is to take credit for anything. Because I want to see the work
That's
continue.
fair.
If
That's
it's
fair.
if
The
it's
things that you had nothing to
yeah,
do with that
the
are
thing,
good, what are
yeah,
those things?
right.
Yeah.
But I have been encouraged by a lot of the things that are being said by the leadership of this department, and I've talked to several folks who are in positions of being able to influence that work, and there is a at least as I see it, a genuine commitment to the health and welfare of the service members and their families, and that's manifesting a bunch of different ways. Um, I I would like to see more outcome, right? Because I think that's the thing that actually it's you know it's easy to say that we started down this road. Had I had more time to be in the mix, I would have run into many of the obstacles that are being run into now, and it would have been, you know, somebody else from the outside saying they're not going fast enough. So I'm certainly not going to take any shots at the folks that are there trying to do that good work. I want to see. I want to anything that we can do to encourage them to go faster, to have more impact. I think we should all take that opportunity. But I am encouraged by a lot of that, and I like to think that there's no downside to those investments in terms of the benefit that they'll have to this class of citizen that is um you know we weren't, when we were planning this, in the middle of what we're in the middle of in Iran right now, so that's on my mind quite a bit of late.
Yeah.
And I want to see the people that are willing to do that work, willing to put themselves in those positions, be supported as much as we
Yeah.
can.
Yeah. I share that and was super encouraged. Last week, I think it was Corvius, one of the privatized housing operators for the DoD, put out a press release announcing that they had certified another tranche of homes under our new well residential system. That good work continues.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's amazing about the work that Corvius is doing is performance testing to actually validate that the work that they've done have generated the outcomes that they were hoping for in terms of air and water and things like that. So really encouraging.
Yeah,
When
and
you left,
I think
yeah,
we should celebrate that. I think we should celebrate that and then use it as a springboard to create more outcome.
yeah, no, I totally agree. And I share that hope and also the dismay over the conditions that we ask people who are in service to our country
It is
to
a
go through.
fixable problem, though. I think that's the
It
thing
is,
we need to keep coming back to. It is a fixable
absolutely.
problem,
Yeah.
which I am
Um,
happy to see people trying to fix it.
So one of the things, slightly different topic, but not unrelated, that you and I share in common is like this desire to be working from a place that can make change at scale. It's like we've talked about how it's almost like an addiction from being at USGBC for so long that you got so spoiled by the ability to be at an organization where you could really see the changes that you are a part of adding up. You eventually landed at the Pentagon. Now you're at global firm HKS. Each of these are addressing scale in a different way. So, talk a little bit about that hunger and thirst and how it's translated into different chapters of your career.
I don't know. There's a part of me that thinks that just I'd probably have been, if I tried to be an actual engineer, probably been bad at it because my uh, patience for detail is not not exactly dialed in to what I see. Like I'm watching all of these. So there's all these designers and project architects that are out here working right now, and they're so focused and they're like working on these things. And I'm looking at that, I'm like, I don't think I could spend 20 minutes doing that. And they're spending, 40 hours. Well, many of them more than that a week, doing that work. So I think there's a temperament aspect to it that we that we share. But the other thing is like you look at the systemic way that we can create change, and the fact that many of the folks that are out there doing that work have been find their why in the production of a building that they can point to and say, I did that. I think the reality is that I feel good about the way that we've been able to change the way that they help them with all of their help evolve the way practice occurs, right? So the
Mm,
things that they're doing are substantively different than they were doing than they would have been doing 20 years ago because things like lead and well have been introduced into the market, right? So bending that arc is a different form of satisfaction that I can understand that they wouldn't groove on at all, right? Because there's no thing that they can grab and say, I produced that, right?
mm,
So there's a temperament part to it.
yeah.
But the other thing is that there's so much work that's left to be done, right? We sometimes look back on the things that have been accomplished and feel good about them. And I don't, you know, we should, right? But also realizing that we're still scratching the surface of what needs to be accomplished in terms of the transformation across just looking at the built environment. We've got a lot more work to do, and that's
Yeah.
reason enough to
What,
swing at it.
when you look back to date, what would you say is the biggest accomplishment or sign of, real change or lasting impact? And then, like, what's the thing that hasn't happened yet that still keeps you up at
It's going to sound pretty mundane, but USGBC is sticking to its guns on environmental tobacco smoke bans. Uh, you know, it 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 was it's either that or the focus that we had on reducing energy use in buildings, right? Because
Mm.
one is acute, one is chronic, and but they have, you know,
Yeah.
massive impact across that. So you got to remember, like 20 years ago, 25 years ago, good Lord, Rachel, 25 years ago, uh, it was still legal to smoke in bars in Virginia, right? So, and we had a sustained pressure when all of that work was happening in Las Vegas to sort of bend and say that's, and then when we internationalized, when all the work that was happening in China and Japan, tremendous pressure and tremendous knots that we tied ourselves into, and then to finally say, no, we're just not going to do this
Yeah.
anymore
Yeah.
was a stance that was I'm really proud of. But it is pretty basic, right?
Okay. Basic is big. And what keeps you up at night?
What
What
keeps me
haven't
up
we
at
done
night?
yet?
Um, lately it's load growth, electricity load growth in the US.
AI in
And
particular?
well, no, because I think that a lot of the mission critical work, data center work, gets unfairly scapegoated. Um, what's what's a, just the fact that we are not learning the lessons that we can learn from integration of energy systems, right?
Yeah.
Uh, we have a tremendous opportunity to leverage the built environment as a strategy to reduce the amount of new generation that we need to build that is being glossed over because people think it's somehow cheaper or somehow faster to build more generation. And
Mm.
that's just wrong on its face, in terms of the economics of it, in terms of the speed of it. And we're barreling down this road of not taking any solace in the fact that all of the capacity, all of the work that we need to support the deployment of all of the AI and data centers that we need to do all of these other amazing things, like create drugs that are going to cure cancer. We're not dragging the resources that are there or lying on the ground to solve
Mm.
those challenges, right? So
Yeah.
I'm concerned that we're going to have this situation where we're going to overbuild, and then we're going to have this big bust if, you know, anyway, there's a lot of those complexities are keeping me, uh, keeping me motivated to engage with our clients at HKS to say, we need to think about your energy use differently than you used to think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. So perhaps not keeping you up at night, but definitely a source of concern because on the or over the tenure that you had at DoD over the course of that time, you had to put some new tools into your own personal toolbox to manage the enormity of the job and the stress that came along with it. Suffice to say, there were decisions that you were asked to make with not a lot of time or information that had potentially life changing consequences for people on the ground. Talk a little bit about your personal learnings from that and how you're carrying that forward into your personal practice or how you lead your teams um, today in your new role.
Yeah, I would say two things. In both instances, I was I was put into a position of relatively senior leadership in both HKS and in the Pentagon. Um, in both instances, I inherited unbelievably talented people who, for the Pentagon job, there are very few people in who can walk into those types of jobs and be conversant in everything that needs to be that you need to be conversant in on day one, right? Um, so being able to rely on the professionalism and the expertise of the people that have been walking that path before was a significant benefit that
Mm,
I availed myself of on the regular. Because there were people who were like deeply, deeply, deeply expert on the electricity system in Guam, right? And they would come up and they would give you their perspective, and the the role really was about synthesis of all of the different, other systems that we're plugging in to what other, the port in Guam, right? With the breakwater there that's protecting the port, where we're putting the generation asset that's going to feed the new the new submarine that's going there, how we managed to park an aircraft carrier, all these other competing things. And that was really the synthesis piece was the thing. I didn't ever try to become an expert on the thing that they were an expert on, but we did engage regularly in conversations about how their piece fit into the other piece and tried to get that all put together. And I think that's really what um, I learned a lot about was relying on the deep subject matter experts to help them synthesize and integrate into the larger systems that they
mm,
were,
mm.
didn't have time, quite frankly, to pay attention to. And I think that's from the work that I've been doing at HKS. That team is really a great resource and really lucky to be able to rely on their brains, but also, you know, I want to have a beer with all of them too. So that's awesome
Surround
too.
yourself with
Right.
smart,
Yeah.
great people.
Yeah.
Well, what about at home? One of the ways I know that you um, both leaned into the notion of self-care and also modeled it for the teams that you lead has been to really like when you're not up in the air or on an installation or speaking at a conference, you're at home as much as you can be. You're at your daughter's you know crew, what do you call them, matches, crew
Regattas.
regattas.
Yeah.
Your son's track meet. You're hanging out with Wendy in the kitchen, and you really focused on making your home a kind of sanctuary. Before we were really having, I would say, a mainstream conversation about healthier homes. You, with a little help from your dad and maybe other family members, bought an old nail salon and waxing salon and still have the flashing neon sign to prove it in your home
Yeah.
office. And you gutted it down. You took it down to the studs. Tell us what you did after. Like, where did you focus your innovation efforts?
Well, I will start by saying, to maybe come back to the first question you asked, we picked a spot where we are really in a place where we don't need to own a car. For day-to-day life stuff. We could get by without one. We do have one, but it's mostly because it's more convenient for us. But we picked a spot that, I can take the metro to work, and it's a Old Town Alexandria is just a great walkable, fabulous community. The St. Patrick's Day parade is Saturday, so if you want to come down, it's one of my favorite days of the year. Anyway, so and if you're in the area, I encourage you to get out to Old Town and spend some money. So I think that's one thing, is that we picked a spot that our kids could, be end up being the place now that they're in high school where a lot of their friends want to congregate because it's adjacent to a lot of cool stuff that's fun to be in. So I would say we started there, um, very intentionally. And then from the build back up, the building that we built was the building that we bought was built initially. The records that we have are 1870, but it was really a butchered, you know, it wasn't taken care of, right? It was falling apart when we bought it. So it needed most of the structural rearrangement that we did, but we kept the outside. We kept it's in a historic district, so we honored that reality, which we would have done anyway. But there are historic preservation requirements in Old Town that I'm happy are there. For the most part, there are some challenges associated with those types with those types of historic preservation frameworks. And I think they need to evolve to meet the current situation that we find ourselves in. But we were really intentional about putting in, a good thermal enclosure for the building. Putting in, I remember talking to the guy who came out to cap the gas meter in the street, he was like, no, you don't want to cap it in the street. You want to cap it inside the house, because when you hook it back up, you're going to want to have to, you're not going to want to have to call us out to uncap it from the street. And I was like, no, I really need to cap it in the street because we're not putting gas back in the house. He's like, you don't know what you're talking about, sir. You're going to need gas in this house. So that was, that was like 7 years ago at this point.
But also just as like novel today, because we did the same thing in the new multi-generational home we just built in Massachusetts. We
Yeah.
didn't, there's no gas line.
Yeah, right,
But
right.
people think it's impossible. Like
Right.
you can't build a home without a gas line.
Right. So that was, again, very intentional, very like connected to the larger sort of, air quality, regional air quality things that are in my head day to day. We used, the materials that were low emitting across the board. So basic green building stuff and the basic health and wellness stuff. We did balanced ventilation with heat recovery and MERV 13 filtration. So even though we live on a busy road, where the outside of our house is routinely covered in, traffic exhaust, the air inside the house is filtered through the systems, and the air quality inside the house is pretty good. So we did, I again, probably the people that are showing up on this, none of that's overly innovative, but it was, intentional and part of the journey that we were on.
Not overly innovative, but certainly not the norm even today, and definitely not the norm when you started that project. I know I took many pages from your efforts and history when we set out to build a home, which is just, the first place where we went wrong was
Yeah.
trying to build a home in the first place. Because it's a crazy endeavor, but there's something just so comforting now, I can say as a mom, to knowing that you've exercised that additional degree of like control, or that additional influence over ensuring that your kids have a healthy place to rest their heads at night. And living in New York, where you often don't have those choices available to you, even if you do own your own home in the city. I came home one day and Asher was crawling on the floor. He wasn't walking yet. And when he stood up, his white PJs were covered in gray dust. And when we looked around, we had, just walked through the door, everything covered in a fine layer of dust. They had started deconstruction on the building next door. And it was just, the levels from our air quality monitors were through the roof. And I still look back on those couple of days that it took us to solve for the problem and think, should I just have gone to a hotel? Like, did I do like permanent damage in my kids' like lungs? I mean, sometimes too much. But
Yeah,
I appreciate, that you set the example for healthier homes before. I think a lot of us were talking about it, and now we're seeing this like enormous hunger. I think in large part born of the pandemic and the elevated level of awareness that people have about the importance that homes, the important role that homes play.
Yeah, I've enjoyed showing people how fast water boils on the induction cooktop. It's like
a good trick.
making converts along the way, right? So
1,000%. I like taking people to the mechanical room. That's the best part of the tour. I've like suddenly become a facility manager by way of this whole build.
Yeah.
I want to give you, a sort of final opportunity to just like have the floor. What's the call to action? Like, what's the one tip? What's the one hope that anyone who's on the line, anyone who catches the archive, that you hope that they will walk away with in the pursuit of healthier and more sustainable spaces?
I don't know. I mean, we've talked about this before. There's aspects of my career that I've stumbled into, right? So I've been extraordinarily lucky. But I think when the things that we've been able to do and and the successes are things that I think it's important to honor and be and to celebrate as the achievements that they are. But I get there's so much more work to do. I think I said that earlier. That and it's now exists in such a time in such a polarized and increasingly divisive time that it's tough to feel like there's any refuge from the risk associated with putting yourself out there for a particular cause. Um, I do think there's enough in the work that we're doing that if we are intentional about framing it correctly and welcoming of the people who are coming in and want to be a part of a piece of it, that we will get to be we will create the threads that I have to believe we will eventually be able to weave back together into one coherent and sustained effort to integrate and then accomplish all the things that we need to accomplish, from the energy transition, from health and wellness, from the materiality conversations that we're having of what we make buildings out of. So
Yeah.
I remain optimistic about that in spite of plenty of evidence that suggests that we're not down that road. And I would just say that perseverance and optimism is the thing that is the big idea, which again, basic, right?
Broaden the tent, stay positive, stay
Yep.
hopeful,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
and keep thinking at a system scale. They're brilliant last bits of wisdom. And speaking of wisdom, just wanted to do a quick shout out. I'm sorry if I miss any of you epic leaders on the line, but some longtime leaders, Katie Hatcher, I think that's you, and Carly Bullock Jones and Chris Schaffner. And of course, the amazing Linda Sorrento, Gail Vittori, like some really incredible old friends, Mark Ginsburg, longtime leaders, and just incredible people on whose shoulders we stand today. Thank you so much to all of you for joining, but to our old friends and our role models, it's always especially meaningful. Inviting any of you to share tips. We have this lovely one here from Puna, says, one tip for the future: value the life of people. There's nothing more important and non-replacement of that every individual. Thank you so much. Brendan, I can't thank you enough for the time today. I could talk to you for hours, and I will. I'll call you. I promise. We postponed our Friday date, but let's try again. Our
yeah.
time is up. We do hope that you'll tune in to our next Well Executive webcast, featuring another one of our iconic Governance Council members, the amazing Cheryl Durst, Executive Vice President and CEO of the International Interior Design Association, or IIDA. That's happening on Wednesday, April 29th at 12 p.m. Eastern. Stay tuned for the details to get registered for that. And once again, another thanks to Daikin, leading innovation in heating, air conditioning, and ventilation technologies for over 100 years, whose generous support makes this interview possible. And finally, a big shout out to the team that continues to make me look really good and help us put all the right preparation into place for days like this. Thank you again, Brendan. I just can't tell you how much I adore every word that comes out of your mouth, and think you're one of the smartest guys I ever got to meet. So it's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Rich. I love you.
Yeah.
All right. Take care.
Talk soon, everybody.